You are freezing, 20,000 years ago, on an open plain with no trees in sight, no caves nearby, and a wind that cuts straight through skin. There is nothing to burn, there is nothing to hide behind. And yet you survived the night. How? For most of human history, survival did not look like grit or muscle. It looked like strange, clever, almost unbelievable workarounds. Tricks so odd that if you saw them today, you would assume they were made up. They were not. They are written into the bones, the stone, and the ash left behind by people who had no other choice but to get creative. Let's start with the cold, because the cold is where some of the strangest tricks were born. On the open steppe of Ice Age Ukraine and Russia, archaeologists have uncovered circular structures built from the bones of woolly mammoths, not wood. Not stone, bone skulls stacked to form a wall. Long limb bones angled like rafters, tusks curved into a frame. This wasn't decoration, it was architecture. With no forests for hundreds of miles, mammoth bone was the only large building material available, and people used it the way you'd use lumber. Here's the strange part. Recent analysis of these huts shows they weren't just walls, they were insulation systems, the bone. Layered and packed with packed earth or hides. Trapped heat far better than you'd expect from something that looks, frankly, like a pile of skeletons. One structure at a site called Megastructures is estimated to have used the remains of dozens of mammoths. That's not one lucky kill. That's planning across years, maybe generations, stockpiling bone the way you'd stockpile firewood. Why does this matter? Because it tells you something counterintuitive. The people who built these huts weren't living hand to mouth, reacting to each crisis as it came. They were thinking ahead. They were engineers, working with the only material the land gave them. Now picture the inside of one of these huts, a small fire, a few people. And almost no fuel to spare because wood barely existed there. So how do you boil water, soften food, or treat an injury without endless fuel? You drop hot rocks into a container. This is called stone boiling. And it shows up independently across nearly every continent from North America to the Pacific, to parts of Europe and Africa. You heat small stones directly in the fire, then carefully transfer them, one by one, into a hide pouch, a hollowed log, or a tightly woven basket filled with water. The stones release their heat into the liquid, pull them out once they cool, drop in new hot ones. And within minutes you have boiling water, without ever putting your only fragile container directly into flame. It sounds almost too simple. But simple is the point. This is what real innovation under pressure looks like. Not a single genius invention, but a method so practical it gets reinvented again and again by completely unconnected peoples who all hit the same problem. How do you cook and disinfect water with materials that can't touch fire? Anthropologist Clint Janulis, who studies the cognitive side of Stone Age survival at Oxford, has pointed out that the biggest lost skill isn't any single trick like this one. It's the broader pattern, deep, inherited knowledge of a specific landscape, passed down so precisely that a 10-year-old in a hunter-gatherer band might know more about local edible plants than most adults do today. That knowledge had to include knowing what would kill you. Across multiple continents, survival depended on distinguishing safe food from food that looked almost identical but wasn't. Some berries that birds eat safely are toxic to humans. Some mushrooms differ from their poisonous twins by nearly nothing: a faint ring on the stem, a slightly different gill color. There was no antidote. No emergency room, just memorized, tested, generationally refined knowledge of exactly what was safe. This is where the trick wasn't really a trick at all. It was data collected the hardest way possible, then passed on so the next generation wouldn't have to relearn it by getting sick or dying. Now let's talk about something even stranger: scavenging. For decades, scientists assumed early humans were primarily hunters, and that scavenging was a desperate backup plan for the weak or unlucky. New research led by teams at IF-CIRCA and Spain's CENI has overturned that picture entirely. Scavenging wasn't a failure mode. It was a strategy, and a smart one. A carcass that a lion or hyena had already killed offered enormous calories for almost no risk, and almost no energy spent chasing anything down. Early humans had something most predators didn't: tools to crack open bones for marrow, fire to make tough scavenged meat digestible, and the cooperation to defend a carcass as a group. So instead of picturing your ancestors as constantly hunting, picture this instead. A small group spots circling vultures on the horizon. That's the sign. Birds mean a carcass. The group moves toward it. Not to fight a lion for fresh prey, but to wait, watch, and time their approach. For the moment, the bigger predators have had their fill and moved on. Then they strip what's left and crack the bones for the marrow inside, the single most calorie-dense part of the whole animal. It's not glamorous. It's efficient, and efficiency is what kept people alive far more often than brute heroics did. Here's the twist that flips the whole primitive savage image on its head completely. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more these survival tricks look less like desperation and more like sophisticated problem-solving under brutal constraints. A site in central China called Lingjing recently produced butchering tools dated to roughly 146,000 years ago. Made using a technique researchers call centripetal flaking, striking a stone core in a circular pattern so each blow produces a sharp, usable flake without wasting material. This wasn't trial and error. It was a repeatable system, refined and taught, used specifically during one of the harshest stretches of the Ice Age. The Ice Age was supposed to be a time of struggle, not innovation. But struggle is exactly what produced the innovation. Pressure didn't shut down creative thinking, it sharpened it. Now reconstruct a single moment using everything you've just learned. You are in that mammoth bone hut. The fire is small because fuel is precious. A woven basket sits near the flames with stones heating inside it, ready to be dropped into water for the evening meal. Someone is testing a fresh stone flake against a strip of hide, checking the edge. Outside, scouts have spotted vultures 2 ridges over, and a small group is already deciding whether it's worth the walk. Nothing here is random. Every object, every decision, is the product of accumulated trial, error, and memory. Refined over countless winters by people who didn't have the luxury of guessing wrong twice. And here's the part that should sit with you. None of this required more intelligence than you have right now. The human brain that figured out stone boiling and bone architecture is the same brain you're using to read this sentence. The difference wasn't capability, it was necessity. They had to solve these problems or they didn't survive the season. You don't have to solve them so you never learn them. That's not a flaw in you. It's just what happens when survival stops requiring a skill. The skill quietly disappears, generation by generation, until almost nobody remembers it existed at all. So the next time you're cold, hungry, or stuck without the right tool, remember this. Somewhere a group of humans faced that exact problem with far less material and far more at stake, and they found a way through it, not with luck. With observation, patience, and a willingness to try something strange enough that it just might work. You were freezing on an open plain with nothing in sight. And somehow you survived the night. That was never an accident. That was 300,000 years of trial and error, built into a single decision made by someone exactly like you.